time management, a life skill for students. This is something I feel like I can talk about because this is an area, probably always will be an area of continual adjustment and struggle for me. And I have often been reminded, the other day I had John Michael, who you saw speak, ask me about a project I was supposed to be working on. And I said, man, I just haven't had time to think about that. And he said, you have time for the things that are most important to you. You need to make a list. And I was like, deja vu, because that's exactly what I used to say to him. So be careful about creating somebody that likes to talk about time management. One of the things I want to start out by talking about, and this is different than yesterday's talk to the staff, but I want to start out with the same foundational principles. When you are talking about time management, you're talking about how your priorities are displayed. And we're going to talk first about you as a parent, getting your act together, getting my act together, and then how to help our kids get their act together, and to do so in a way that makes sense and reflects their priorities. But I've mentioned this several times today about the fact that we have to make sure that our priorities are lining up with God's priorities, and to look at the things that we're considering putting on our schedule through His eyes and through the eyes of what He thinks is most important. And I never want to talk about time management or scheduling or anything without always reminding myself about that and reminding you about that, because it is so very important. Otherwise, we will start to take on the priorities of those around us. We become a slave to what their expectations are, what everybody else is doing, what what our responsibilities are in various areas, overcommitting, instead of really putting things through a sieve underneath a magnifying glass and asking, is this God's priority for me? Does it line up with biblical principles? And we have to do that first before we start talking to our kids about it. All right, so when you have been spending time in the Word and being transformed and not conformed, as it says in Romans 12, it's important that you and your husband determine what your dreams and your goals are for your family. Why are you here? Why are you having children? Why are you home educating? What are you hoping to accomplish? What do you want? What do you not want? And this is the same type of thing that we will be talking to our kids about when I get to that section. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want your kids to remember your marriage? How do you want your kids to remember your home? What kind of relationship are you desiring with your kids and with your husband? And what are the most important things that you want your child to leave your home being equipped in? This is huge. And this is a developing list that will change and grow as you homeschool your children and as you raise your kids. But my number one thing is you need to write it down. I was privileged to be able to sit under the teaching of Stephen Covey several times and Zig Ziglar several times. And they talked so much about the importance of writing down your goals, your dreams, your visions. Because again, if you don't know where you're headed, you're going to end up nowhere. So write these down. Take some time to journal. Take some time to type it. There's some online journals that you can do as well. When we first started homeschooling, I read a couple of really books that made a huge impression on me. One was Educating the Wholehearted Child. It is really old, but it's still in print. There's a new version out. It's by Clay and Sally Clarkson. And I read that, and she talked about having a dream or a vision for your child and writing it down. So John and I talked about that, which I'll mention in a minute, and made a list. We made a huge list of the things that we felt like meant ardios for our kids, and it was different for each one. You know, that each one of your children are different, and each one of my boys were different from each other as well. Boys were different. I said that right. So what does adios mean to you? And write that down. What do you want to have accomplished with your children by the time they leave home? What kind of relationship? What kind of education? Write it down. That is so very important. Then get together and discuss it with your spouse. When John and I got together, we had many of the things that were the same, but we had some things that were different. And we all had to discuss different perspectives. And you know what? I will share this with you. When we narrowed it down to the top 10, making a high SAT score or ACT score was not on there. Now, did we have boys that did that? Absolutely. Do we have guys that got scholarships and got leads and and played sports? Yes, absolutely. But were those on our top 10? No. What ended up being on our top 10 were those qualities that we felt like God was telling us would help make that child fully equipped. So discuss it with your spouse. Get his or her wisdom and input on it. Ask yourselves the same questions ask each other the same questions that you've asked yourselves, and share those answers, and then come together with mutual dreams and goals and priorities. Now, you type A spouses that have maybe a type A partner or spouse, but they don't like to write things down. They don't like to have meetings. They don't like to don't force that. Just walk along the way and discuss it along the way, and it will come. Once you have determined your priorities as a family and as an individual, then you can start planning and develop a schedule that's based on a lifestyle that reinforces the dreams and the goals and the visions that you have for your family. And this is also going to come into play when we talk about the students. But you can't teach something you don't know, that you haven't experienced. So begin to walk through this process yourself now before the school year gets started, and develop a schedule based on that lifestyle that you feel like God has for you. To do that, you have to have intentional time management. And I'm going to share with you something that has worked for me and for John and for all of our boys, because our life it feels like it's always unexpected. Do you have that? There's always something unexpected happening. And so we started working with something called blocks of time. We like to call it playing with blocks, and it makes a lot more realistic versus idealistic about how much we could get done in a particular time and how we were using our time. I like to call it playing with blocks, and there are different categories, right? There's the category of things that are non-negotiable. There's work, there's homeschooling, there is relational ones, there's friendships, there's ministry, there's time to get your bills in order, there's time to just clean the house. There's all sorts of things, categories that are stacked up one on top of the other that make up your life. And we have to get a handle on how we're using that time. So here are some real practical steps to getting that in order and then walking your kids through the same process. First of all, I like to have something called an ideal family week. And I said this yesterday to the staff, but do I ever have an ideal week? Does it ever go according to my plan? Nope, not since I started having kids. Nothing seems to ever go according to plan, but this gives me a framework, parameters in which to operate in, a goal. And again, you're not going to end up anywhere unless you're headed towards something. So I print out a weekly calendar. I have this in I still use a Franklin Covey planner. I know it's old-fashioned, but I do. So I print out a weekly calendar with, the time, the days, and the times. And based on my priorities, now remember this process because you're going to teach your kids this. Based on the priorities, I go into that calendar and I block out chunks of time for my non-negotiables. Non-negotiables for me were I had to have time for homeschooling. I had to have time for myself for quiet time to take care of myself. I had to have time with John, those sort of things. Write them down. Those are your non-negotiables because they directly reflect the priorities that God has given you. And if they don't line up, then something's out of whack and we need to swing back towards the middle. So block out, get the word block out chunks of time for those non-negotiables and write them on the calendar. Be sure to include your homeschool hours in those non-negotiables. That isn't always a popular thing to say because we all love flexibility in our homeschooling, and I get that, and we're going to be able to move these blocks of time around, but you have to have the time set aside. One of the things that I realized when my boys were the older boys were entering high school was I had us coming and going so much on our non-RDO days that there wasn't a chunk of time for us to homeschool and for them to focus in on projects or assignments. And I was causing them stress because I didn't have it blocked off in our schedule. So include your homeschool hours in the non-negotiable, but only the amount of hours that are required. You know, I don't know what it is in South Carolina or Georgia. I believe it's 4 hours per day in Colorado. And I'm not sure what it is in Michigan or Texas or Virginia. But whatever it is, block it out. It doesn't have to be all at once. It could be 2 hours here, 2 hours here. But make sure it's on the calendar. Because if not, you're going to get frustrated with your kids because their stuff isn't done. And they're frustrated with you because you didn't leave them alone long enough to be able to get anything done. I know this from personal experience. All right, so now you have created what is a non-negotiable calendar of what is most important to you and to your family. Then you're going to make copies of that same non-negotiable calendar, and you're going to start working with your children for them to design some of their blocks. So when I sit down, for example, when I sat down with Jared his freshman year of high school, which was a huge transitional year for him, we sat down and we wrote on that calendar when his cello lesson was, when he was at Ardios, when he had later on when he had a work responsibility outside the home. We wrote those in the calendar, and he also knew when we were doing homeschooling. Start working with them to design some of their own blocks so that they realize that when you take one block and move it around, you replace it with another, or if you take too many blocks out, they fall down and there's chaos and stress. So start working with them even from when they're very, very young. I used to print these things out. I know it sounds ridiculous, but because I struggle in this area, I would print these things out, and we would have a family meeting on Sunday nights, and I would hand it all out, and we would sit down and we would plan our week together, especially when the kids were younger, so that they knew what to expect. If you have younger children, one of the things that gives them security is a rhythm, kind of knowing what to expect. Not that you have to be tied to that rhythm or routine, but I used to put it on. I had one specifically that had to know what was happening. It was a anxiety issue with him. I would put that schedule on the refrigerator so that he wasn't asking me all the time, what's next? What's coming next? What are we doing? Where are we going? Who's coming? He could go right there and start taking control of his own outlook by seeing what was coming up in the week and plan accordingly. Okay, so how do we transmit what we're working on with an ideal week to our students? From really early ages, begin to talk to them about priorities, what's most important. And of course, you're talking to them on their level, but when you're talking to them, you need to be demonstrating it too. I can't just say it's important for me to spend time in prayer and reading God's word, and you need to have that as a priority. If they see me doing it, then they're going to realize that it is a true priority. So talk to them about priorities, both yours for yourself and yours for them, but talk about theirs too. What are they interested in? What do they envision when they grow up? And be prepared for that to change 35 million times. But start the conversation early. Then let them know what the non-negotiables are. It was non-negotiable that they were doing school when I said they were doing school. And I've had parents say to me, my husband is very black and white, cut and dry. And I remember him coming home one time and I said, I can't get the boys to do school when I told them to do school. And he said, like, they don't have a choice. And I said, I know, but I can't. And it's just, he said, they don't have a choice. You're the parent. They have to do school. Do they have to do it successfully? I can't always control that. But I do have a non-negotiable of that's when they're going to be doing school. A non-negotiable maybe of if you're paying for music lessons of when they're practicing. And this is when they're young, and of course they're going to begin to take ownership of that as they get older. So it includes education and study or practice. Talk about those non-negotiables, what your priorities are for your family. Then explain to them that if they come to you, I love this part because it teaches them a little bit of margin. Not that we're all successful at that, but it teaches a margin that if they ask me to go over and spend the night at a friend's house in the middle of the week, right? And it's going to interfere with those chunks of time that we have set aside for education. I will make that decision when they're younger. But when they're older, I may start to give them a little bit more responsibility. And I will say to them, I don't mind if you do, but you're going to have to tell me when those blocks of study time, home education time, are going to be reworked into the schedule before the end of the week. Now this works for us too, as when we are torn a million different directions, knowing that we have blocks of time to set aside to handle that, and if we let anything interfere with that block that we're going to have to rearrange it, that will really settle a lot of problems for us. So explain to them about rearranging blocks. Then explain to them about removing blocks. This is the hardest part. When you have, and there is a workshop, a whole workshop on intentional time management and designing a homeschool that works for you that we have available for you to listen to. But I've talked about when you've got an activity or your child has an activity that doesn't line up with the priorities that you have for that coming year or for them overall, or that's taking time away from your non-negotiables, then you might have to talk about removing that block, and that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes you have to remove them and in order to find margin, in order for you to meet the overall priorities for your family. So discuss with them what that means. We have a saying that says when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. When you're saying yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. We are actually facing that right now in our family. We made a commitment to something and didn't really think about, it has nothing to do with RDOs, didn't really think about the ramifications schedule-wise for this one block chunk of time. And so we are having to rearrange things all over the place in order to fulfill that commitment. And that block may be removed in the future if we actually live to tell about it. Okay. All right. So time management as it applies in education. So they're learning about their life as a whole, right? And this takes time. This takes time. Every year in my classes, I set up a time in my teaching class time to talk about time management. to ask them to write out their schedule, to find times for when they're going to be studying for particular classes. And I walk through that. And I would encourage our teachers to do the same thing, or to do it in your assembly and talk about time management, especially as they move into middle school and high school. But you can work with them on time management in education if you will stay aware of what's going on in their classes. Haiku is our learning management system, which is online, and every week our teachers are required to go on there and to say what they studied, what they went over in class this week, and what's coming up for next week, and what that student should be doing at home. The younger the child is, the more flexibility there is. The older the child is, the more accountability there is. So stay aware of what's going on. Go on Haiku and find out what's going on in those classes. Guys, I think I've been hanging out with my husband a long time, so I'm becoming more black and white, but you're paying for this. And so we want you to take ownership of that and ask questions. So go online, find out what's going on. The day after the classes have met, when the kids were younger, I would go online, and when I was homeschooling on my own, I would make a list of the things that we wanted to do for that particular week. And when they began participating in Haiku, we would go online and we would print out those class assignments. And instead of having a freak out moment when they looked at the class assignments, I would help them divide it into the days and the times that we had set aside for home education on the non-negotiable calendar. So we would look at that assignment. We would say, okay, we have a paper due at the end of the week, just a 5-paragraph essay. So on our first day at home, let's work on an outline and perhaps the introduction paragraph and the conclusion paragraph. And then on the second day, why don't we go ahead and do some of the research and writing for paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll go on and the third day we'll do some editing and fine-tuning of that, helping them take a huge project to them and break it down and put it on their calendar, helping them make mini blocks within the blocks of time that they have for their homeschooling. I have a perfectionist child. I'm sure all of you do too, at least one. And he would get into one assignment for one class and camp there for, I don't know, all day long, go past our home education because he wanted it to be just perfect. And I appreciate that, but there were other assignments to do as well. So we helped to break it up into mini blocks. We're going to work an hour on this, and then we're going to move to this. Or if your child works better in clumps, then I'm going to work, 2 hours on this, and then I'll move on to this. But there was a plan to it so that we moved through the material. Post those assignments. I had one that would print them out. He would put them on the wall of his room, and as he got each little piddly thing done, he would cross it off, and it was like a major celebration. As he got older, as they all got older, they learned to do this all on their own. Our goal is to create independent learners and people that can really manage their time and learn to be independent and lifelong learners. Give them more and more responsibility for their own blocks of time. Give them the option to arrange those blocks or rearrange them as they get older. And second to the last big point is allow them to fail. Man, if I could say, let them fail. If they're, especially as they get older, if they're not doing what they need to do, don't go in there and do it for them. Give them deadlines, give them assessments, love them, give them grace where needed, but allow them to fail and to take responsibility for that failure or that shortcoming when the time comes. Then always encourage them to succeed and encourage any tiny step that they're making towards becoming an independent learner and to managing their time. The last thing I want to leave you with is, oh, I've gone long. No, I didn't. The last thing I want to leave you with is the 3 P's. We had 4 P's yesterday. We have 3 P's today. Whenever you're planning your schedule, whenever you're thinking about what's most important, remember that people should always come first. This is what we tell our teachers. People come first. The process of learning comes second. Don't rush to the product. The process of learning comes second. Let your child enjoy the process of learning, not just be focused on the product. And if you do those 2 things, the third one will follow, which is the product that you're desiring, and it will continue to get better as you work through that. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And really quickly, no, I'm not even going to ask. I'm sure that your directors can handle any questions that come your way on this. I do have a question that just came in. Where can we get the scope and sequence for conservatory? It's actually on the Haiku staff page underneath conservatory curriculum. So you can find that, and that will be really helpful to you as you plan your child's process through the conservatory. Okay, anything else? Any student planners, like a planner you recommend? Boy, I tried a million of them over the years, but one of the ones that I would just highly recommend, and Renee, you know I've been on a journey with this myself. I tried all these other planners. I tried separating my life into sections and having different planners for different things. I came back to Franklin Covey. That's what I raised John Michael on. That's what I raised Jeremy on, and that's what I raised Jordan on. And Jared, by the time he came around, it was all on here. So we did a lot of planning on his phone in that way because he was really into that. So I still think there should be one planner for a child so that they can see the whole thing. They can see everything that's coming up, not just academics, and that they can also use it for their whole life, including their academics. JC says that Whit, her son, uses Well Planned Day. That is put out by Home Educating Family, I believe, or Home Educating something. And you can just Google Well Planned Day, and that's what he uses. So that's some ideas as well. But start early, and most of all, find out what your priorities are and demonstrate it. Demonstrate it, and then they will catch on from there, and you can give them that instruction. All right, guys, that's it for me for today. You guys, some of you are done. Some of you still have a few things left to do. I just want to say thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for participating, and we would love to do this in the future. We'd love to do it live in some places, and just be able to continue to build community, a transparent community that says, you know what, I struggle with this, but here's what I've found, and for us to be able to support one another. So please feel free to contact us at any time. You can reach me at llane@ardiosAcademies.com, and until I come visit your schools, I'll see you later. Bye.